You can draw this in Procreate. It's time for another You Can Draw This video, and this time we'll be drawing this desert scene with cactuses. I will guide you through all the easy steps, and we will only be using the brushes that are already in Procreate. And I'm sure that you can create this as long as you follow the video all the way till the end. And you know, if things are going too fast, just hit pause and take your time. And I'm always delighted to see all of your results on Instagram, so keep sharing them and don't forget to tag me in the image and not just in the description. And also, of course, I won't be able to see your work if your account is set to private. So let's start creating. First, of course, you'll want to know the canvas size. It's 3000 by 2000 pixels. And once again, I have created a color palette in case you want to use the exact same colors I'm using in this video. You can download the color palette for free through the link in the description. First thing we'll do is fill our canvas with a color. We'll fill it with this first color in the color palette. You can just drag the circle onto your canvas to fill it entirely. That's pretty easy so far. Now we'll go to our second color. We'll pick the second color in the color palette and we will create a new layer. We'll go to the layer palette and you can click the plus to create a new layer on top of our orangey layer that we just created. And for our brush, we will use the monoline brush. You can find it under calligraphy. And let's set the size of our brush to 15%. And I will start a line at about 2/3 from the bottom or 1/3 from the top. Just around here, and we'll make a flowing line. And then you can just drag in the color to fill that bottom part. And now let's make our brush a little bit smaller. We'll go to around 5%, and I would like to make some shapes in our sky here because that's a sky, even though it's not blue. This is our sky, and we'll make some, well, it's a bit like clouds, some mist. Just make a wobbly line like this and then start at one side and close it there, and you can drag in the color to fill that shape. And let's make another one just below it. We can make that one a bit thinner and drag in the color. And let's also make two on this side. And just make sure that you close the shape. And one more below. Make sure you vary the shapes a bit and drag in the color to fill it. Now we'll continue to our third color. So let's go to the color palette and pick that third color. And again, we'll make a new layer on top. So just click the plus and layer 3 will appear. We will still be using the monoline brush, but you can set it back to 15% or whatever you prefer. It doesn't really matter. And now we'll make a wobbly line just below that one that we have created. Something like this, for instance, and then fill that area again. And I will go to the fourth color. It's a bit more orangey. And again, create a new layer by clicking the plus and still use the monoline brush. And now we will create something like a mountainy shape. And we'll start just below that yellow line. We'll start just about halfway of our canvas. And let's just create a wobbly mountain-like shape. And you don't have to get it right in one go. You can always just adjust it later. Just make your line a bit wobbly. Let's go down here. And make sure that you'll see some of that yellow, some of that third color, and some of that second color. So we have some of that yellow sticking out. Now you can fill that shape, and if you feel like you need to get rid of some areas, you can always just click the eraser and hold it. And that way your eraser is now set to the monoline brush as well. And then you can just start erasing some parts. If you want to see some more of that yellow, you can just work on your mountain shape. Kind of like carving it out. You can give it some more wobbles. And of course the same goes for that yellow shape. For each shape actually, you can always just adjust it, add a little bit more, or use the eraser to erase some parts. That's all fine. Now we have our first mountain range. Let's make another one. So let's create a new layer on top of this one and go to our next color. That's the 5th color in the color palette. And again, we will still be using the monoline brush. And this time we'll start a little bit below our first mountain. And again, make a wobbly shape. I'm making it less high this time. More like a hill. Like that, and fill that shape by dragging in the color. And on to the next color. That's the 6th color in the color palette. And now that we got our color, of course we will need to make a new layer on top of the other layer so we can create our next shape. Let's start a bit lower and make a curvy shape. And just fill that color, fill that layer, that shape by dragging in the color. And I will go to our next color and you'll think, hey, there is a new color in the color palette, and you are right, because I had actually forgotten to add that 7th color in our color palette, but it's here now. I magically inserted it here by pausing the recording, of course. And let's create a new layer on top so we can start adding this 7th color. I'll start pretty low here and go up, and then pretty close to that other layer. And we'll fill it by dragging in the color. And then finally, we will create another layer on top. This is the last layer. And almost our last color in the color palette. It's the 8th color. And we will make a final layer here on top. I'll start a bit higher this time than our previous layer. And again, make a bit of a wobbly shape like that. And just drag in the color to fill the shape. Our scene is already starting to look pretty interesting, but of course we also want to add those cactuses. Let's start with our cactus in the foreground. So we'll have to be on layer 8. That's that darkest layer. We'll still be using the monoline brush, which you can find under calligraphy. And we'll also just be using this dark color. And let's make the brush a bit bigger. I'm going for 40%. But it's really a matter of personal preference. And let's create a cactus here. I'll go up, make a line up, and go all the way to that sky. Now, I actually think my personal preference here is to make my brush a little bit smaller. I think this is a bit too thick. Perhaps 23% is nice. And now let's add some more cactus parts to our cactus. Like these silly arms. And a little one here at the bottom. And you can just drag in the color again to fill your shape. And in case you get little gaps right next to your lines, then you might have to adjust your fill threshold. And you can do that by dragging in the color, holding it, and then sliding from left to right. Now you won't be able to see much right now unless I go all the way to the right, then it'll fill my entire screen. But you might need to adjust that if you get a little gap. And again, of course, you can adjust the shapes a little bit, or you can use the eraser to remove parts from the cactus. That's all fine. And now let's go to the layer below, layer 7, and also pick that color of that layer. That's this color right here. Or of course you can also hold your finger on the screen to pick the color. Let's create another cactus just about here. Let's go up. And let's give it arms as well. And one on this side. And again, fill the color by dragging in that color dot. Finally, let's make a cactus on layer 6 as well. So we'll pick the color that is on layer 6. And I'll make my brush a bit smaller. Let's go for 10%. And I'll make a cactus here. And I'll give it some arms. And you can just play around with this and you can create different cactus shapes. You can just look up some reference images of different types of cactuses. Now I would like to add some needles to our cactuses because of course they are prickly. And I would like to add some more plants. And let's just start with that on the layer on which we are already working. So we can stick to that same color, but I do want to change the brush. I'm going to pick the script brush. Let's make it a bit smaller. Perhaps 6%. Yeah, that's a nice size. And now let's just add these needles, these spikes to our cactus and just vary the length of these needles. Some will be a bit longer, some will be pretty small, and you can also change the angles of these needles a bit. And just go along the entire side of the cactus. Until it's entirely covered with needles. And let's also add some interesting plants to this part of the painting. You can just make various plant shapes like this. And with this brush, the harder you press, the thicker your brush stroke will be. So try to play around with that. You can also create one here. You can make something like this with some wiggly twigs. And again, like I said, you can just use reference images. Look up some photos of plants. Or just use your imagination. And now we can move on to the layer on top of this one. That's layer 7. And pick the color that we have used on this layer already. And let's get started on this cactus. Now, I think we can go a bit bigger with our brush. Let's go to 10%. And let's make the needles for this cactus. And keep in mind to vary the lengths of these needles. Vary the angle a bit. Now, of course, for these, you can draw these videos. For these tutorials, I plan out every single step of the process, of the drawing and painting process. But if you're interested in seeing my real process from sketch to finish, and if you want to go a bit more in depth into Procreate and learn about painting techniques, then you might like my Patreon page, because there I share fully narrated video tutorials from sketch to finished piece. I'll take you through my entire thought process. And of course, there I also share my brushes and my working files, references I use, and the tutorials range from beginner level all the way up to more advanced levels. That looks pretty prickly. Let's add some plants on this layer as well. Let's again make some various shapes for these plants. Just use your imagination or reference images, of course. Or you can just copy the plants that I'm making right here. Making these various plants with different shapes, that'll make your painting look more interesting than just keep copying the same shapes. Now let's go to our foreground, to that darkest layer, layer 8, and let's pick that dark color to start adding some pricklies, some needles to this cactus. Let's just go all along the surface, creating shorter and longer needles in different angles. And like I said, you can also create some different cactus types. There are so many interesting cactuses in the world, and it would be really nice to see some variation. I always like it when I see you can draw this video tutorial results, which are just a bit different when I can see that you've played around with the tutorial, creating your own thing. Of course, just copying it and following along, that's great, and you can learn a lot by following these steps. But once you've followed it and copied it, try playing around and creating your own thing. Following step-by-step tutorials like this one is a really great way to learn all about the techniques that you can use, all the tools that you can use in Procreate. And once you've followed more and more of these tutorials, you will start finding your own way, creating your own things, varying things. And you'll start combining all of these tutorials. And that's really great to see. This looks prickly enough, so let's continue and create some plants on this layer. Perhaps we can make the brush a bit bigger since we are moving towards the foreground. I'll go to 18%. Now we're almost there. Just continue making a couple of more plants. And again, I try to make varying shapes for these plants. We can make another one here on the left. And finally, let's make one last plant here on the right. Now I can think of a way to make this painting look even more interesting. You've seen me create art in circles, in droplets, in all kinds of shapes. And that's not a thing that you need to decide at the beginning of your painting process. You can also do this at the end of your painting process. And this time I would like to add a chalky effect. And the way we can do that is by using a layer mask. But of course we have a lot of layers right now, so we'll want to combine those. Let me first select all the layers and I'm just going to group them. Now unfortunately in Procreate at this time it's not possible to use a mask on a group, so we'll have to merge the layers before we can apply a mask. Now I would like to save my layer, so I will be duplicating this group and then merging all of these layers. But perhaps you aren't able to duplicate your group because maybe Procreate will say that you have exceeded the limit of layers. What you can do then, if you still want to save your layers, you can just duplicate your entire canvas and then merge the layers on your new canvas. So that way, in the initial file, you'll still have your layers in case you want to change something later on. But I will just save this group in this file, but I'll turn it off since I don't need it right now. And on this layer, this single layer, I am able to use a layer mask. Once you have attached a mask, you will see this layer filled with white. And when a layer mask is white, it means that everything will shine through. You will see everything on that layer which it is attached to. But once you start painting on it with black, things will start to disappear. Let me show you. I'll pick pure black by double tapping in my circle. And let me just fill this layer with that black. And you see everything is masked. But I don't want everything to be masked. I want to have parts of that painting show up. So let me grab a brush. I will go to the charcoals and use the charcoal block. And I will set it to white. You can double tap in this white corner to select pure white. And now if you start painting on that layer mask with white, the painting will start to appear again. Now with this charcoal block, I have it set to, well, I can barely see it, 34% I think. And I'll just paint back in that scene, giving it a nice chalky edge. Now I just think that that white background, that's a bit too, well, a bit too harsh. Let's make a layer underneath this mask layer and let's fill it with a nice background color. Let's pick this light yellow. I think that's better. And now you've created a lovely desert scene with cactuses. I hope you have enjoyed following this tutorial. I can't wait to see your results. If you want to learn more, then you might want to check out my other You Can Draw This video tutorials. Or check out my Skillshare classes or my Patreon page to go even more in depth. Or you can just get started with these two videos over here. Have a great day!